Alright, I've got the 650 VSAR custom back in the garage for front tube and tire and rear tube and tire. So I'm just gonna walk us through that real quick today. Alright, first you're gonna remove the rear brake adjustment nut. I usually pull the arm toward the front of the bike just to get the tension off of the nut, and that way it will unthread a lot easier instead of leaving the arm back, putting pressure on the nut. So when you do this, you'll have the nut come off. Like so. Put the pointed edge toward the front. Okay, next I'm going to take a 12mm to the stabilizer bar for the brake drum. Loosen that. Okay, I'm going to knock the bolt out with the stabilizer bar. Okay, I'm going to loosen the nut for the front stabilizer bar bolt. And that should let it drop down. Okay, I'm going to use a 14mm socket. Loosen these 4 bolts and hold the final drive shaft to the swing arm and the rear wheel. And when you take these off, be aware that there's a washer that comes with the bolt. I'm going to loosen the axle nut with a 1/2" drive breaker bar and 19mm impact socket. And in this case, the axle nut is spinning just a hair, so I'm going to hold the brake side, the right side, with a 19mm wrench, and I'm going to hit it with an impact, like so. Alright, with the 4 bolts for the final drive shaft, the axle nut, the stabilizer arm, and the brake adjustment rod all being loosened, the rear wheel is ready to slide out. Alright, so at this point I have dropped the little ramp out of the center of the rear of the lift, the little drop plate, and the rear wheel is ready to come out rearward with the final drive shaft and the rear brake drum on it. Alright, so the brake drum slides off along with the axle out of the brake side of the bike, and then you have the drive shaft, which should pop right off, like so. And make sure you capture your spacer, and then you have a standard wheel. Just like any other wheel when you take it off, it just obviously comes off a little differently than your typical removal. And then your washer and your axle nut go on the clutch side, like so. Alright, I'm going to use a plastic scraper to remove the wheel weights. Get that cleaned up and clean off the wheel. Remove the valve stem cap. Remove the nut that holds the valve stem to the rim, and remove the valve stem core. Alright, I'm going to check the tube in order to do that. Got to get some air in the tube. Like to make sure my valve stem core is tight, which it is. Put some air in here, let this thing take shape. And I don't hear any air leaking, which is a good sign. Next thing I like to do is put some powder on the tube. You can put it on the tube, you can put it in the tire, you know, whatever you prefer. I like to just put it directly on the outer surface of the tube. Doesn't really matter. I feel like there's less powder accumulation inside of the tire if you do it this way, whereas if you pour it directly into the tire, you have like a bunch of leftover stuff in there, which I don't really like that. Honestly, it probably doesn't really matter. Put some powder on there to make sure it doesn't chafe inside. And then as for tire choice, we're going today with the Pirelli Route MT Route 66 tire. So it's supposed to be a pretty good tire for the money. It's not an expensive premium tire. It's, you know, kind of overpriced in my opinion. This is not that case. I think it's better than like a budget tire, like a Shinko or something like that for sure. I think any tire that Pirelli makes is going to be better than any tire that Shinko makes. But I've read good things about them. The price was very competitive. Was really competitive with like the entry-level name brand tires, like a Dunlop D404. And you're supposed to get more miles out of this tire and better performance. So based on the price points, it was my recommendation to the customer. He agreed and we chose to go with it. So I'm going to mount these up and see how they go. I would imagine this is a directional tire. There it is. So it says Ruota Motris, driving wheel, which I would mean, or which I would assume means something along the lines of it spins this way. I don't think you put an arrow on it. That is the opposite way of direction that it needs to spin. But I don't speak whatever language that is, so I guess we'll just have to assume that I'm right and that it's accurate. Obviously the brake side is the right side of the bike, so if the tire spins clockwise as I look at it right now, that means the brake shoes, the brake drum needs to face me. And then as for the valve stem, it's 90 degrees off. So that means you have to pick which direction you want it to face. In this case, it should face the clutch side because the exhaust is on the brake side. So drum clockwise with the arrow, and then your valve stem needs to be toward the clutch side. Got a red dot right here. I'm going to assume that's the mark for the lightest part of the tire, which means I'm going to line up the valve stem with this dot and face it toward the clutch side. key here is to take enough air out to where you can squeeze it in, so to speak, but to leave enough to where the tube retains shape. Because if it retains its shape, it's easier to make sure that it doesn't twist or get caught. Alright, so in this case I'd like the valve stem to face me, which means I need to pretend that I'm on the clutch side of the bike, which means that the rotation of the wheel needs to be counterclockwise, because I'm now on the clutch side of the bike. And I just barely thread it on, just so it holds everything in position, but you don't want to over tighten it, because then it'll start stressing the tube when you're spinning the tire on. Alright, rotation is this way, this is facing the clutch side of the bike, which is what I want. Right there. Try to get the first second bead worked over there. Sometimes you get a little more, sometimes you get a little less. Big key to this is to create a third hand here. This is where it starts getting difficult. The big key is to create a third hand here to keep pressure down, and then you got to keep the rest of the tire down in the drop center of the rim. Because as you get closer to the edge of the rim, it becomes wider in essence. It thickens. It's the contour and the shape of the rim. So if you keep the tire pushed down, it's not fighting that contour, which means you basically have more slack to work the bead over the edge of the rim. So again, third hand, and then I push down, make sure I'm in the drop center. I'm just taking real small bites. Make sure I don't pinch the tube, because if you grab the tube with these irons, you're probably going to pinch it, and then you're going to have a split in your tube, and then you're going to be doing this all over again. So you got to make sure when you bite the rim, if you feel like you're biting rubber, you got to stop and look. Alright, so we got our two pops, which is good. I'm going to go and throw it at 45, and then I'll set it at final pressures once it's back on the bike. I like to put it a little high at first, just to make sure if it has a leak, I detect it sooner rather than later. Alright, Bellston cord is tight. And let's go ahead and tighten the lock nut down at the base of the valve stem. And this is one of those things, it's a snug fit. When you start torquing it down and wrenching on it too hard, you run the risk of tearing the tube from the inside. That's a problem you do not want to have, especially at this stage of the game where you're in good shape and you're like finishing the job up. Alright, so I'm going to balance the tire, or the wheel I should say, while it's settling out to the heavy spot on the bottom. Really hasn't anything. It's important that you use the right tools for the job. It makes this type of work a lot easier. But, spooning tires on, I mean, it would be great for me to spend $1,500 on a machine, or $2,000 or $3,000, but I'm still spooning and it's working fine. But get the right stuff to help you with this. Otherwise, you're just gonna get frustrated. And go better than the eBay or Amazon tire irons. These are Motion Pro. Which all their stuff that I own is great. But have the right tools. Use the third hand trick that I was demonstrating, and then just pay attention and go through every step. That way, you don't get to this stage of the game and say like, "Oh crap, I put something on the wrong side." Like the valve stem or the dot on the tire or the direction of rotation, and you get this far and to have to take it apart and do it again, not fun. But anyway, I use tape, chalk works, anything works visually to mark the heavy portion of the wheel, which basically aims or translates to the bottom, because the heaviest point is going to drift toward the bottom. Make sure the washers are on the outside of the swing arm. Roll this guy in and make sure you can see the drive shaft is going. And if it's not going, spin the wheel, because when you spin the wheel, the drive shaft turns, which should let it line up with the splines inside of the gear case, the drive, I should say. Alright, there we go. So obviously this all has to be in position for these 4 holes to line up, but there is some not yaw, there's some like tilt associated with it. So you can rotate this a little bit, just a hair. I mean, obviously not a lot, but just enough to get the bolts to line up in the 4 holes, and then make sure you count for all the washers that need to go on these bolts. Alright, make sure you have the washers to the outside of the swing arm. Just gonna snug it up. Final torque spec is 66 foot-pounds and 50 foot-pounds on these 4. And 60 foot-pounds for the axle nut. Helps if you use the correct socket. And I'm going to drop the rear wheel down. You have a rear tire and tube replacement, rear wheel removal, or brake shoe install, or whatever it is that you may want to do.